May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts always be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, I have to say it's a great joy to be back with you all. I guess I didn't mess up too badly the first time, so you consented to have me back again. And this morning, I thought we would think about together the idea of names and identity. Because in the Jewish Testament, there's the story of the renaming by God of Abraham and Sarah. But I'm also very conscious of the fact that in the gospel story, there's Peter, who himself was renamed by Jesus and became Peter, the rock, as a name that Jesus had given him. Now, there are Bible scholars, given Peter's character, that think that that was Jesus' attempt at humor. A kind of ironic labeling of someone who is not very rock-like at all, and not rock-like in what we've just heard. Peter, just before this passage in Mark's Gospel, nails it and gets it right. He says, "You are the Messiah, Jesus, that we've long waited for." But then he doesn't know when to quit. And within a few minutes, he's being rebuked harshly, very harshly. In fact, I think rebuke is too soft a word for it, by Jesus. Because Peter can't accept Jesus' teaching that he is to suffer, be crucified, and rise from the dead. So Peter argues with Peter, and then Jesus turns to Peter and says, "Get behind me, Satan." But it makes me think of the power of names and what names signify to us. We all have names. We have names for things and for institutions. And I think very often those names have a power, not just to identify, but have meaning as well. So I was thinking about church names and how church names can sometimes, I think, convey or signify what the community is like that they represent. So I am the priest at Church of the Messiah in Rhinebeck, the only Church of the Messiah in the Diocese of New York. So it's an unusual name for a parish. And although I can tell you everyone who in 1860 had not paid their pew rental, I can't tell you why they chose the name. But it does signify, and I'll tell you a couple things why I think Messiah is a good name for the congregation that we are. Apparently, the Church of the Messiah has a reputation for being a little scruffy sometimes. And that's because our buildings are used quite a bit by the community in different programs. And there are lots of people coming in and out of our buildings all week long. So not everything is always in its place. And this was borne out a couple years ago when someone said to me, "Richard, do you realize that when the church office calls someone, the caller ID says Church of the Messy?" Couldn't be more perfect. And then along came Zoom during COVID. And of course, Church of the Messiah got a Zoom account, and we participated to the best of our ability in that technology. And although I didn't set it up, apparently the permanent label for our Zoom account just is Messiah. So now every time I join any meeting online on Zoom, it says Messiah has entered the room. And I'm not changing it. I love our bishops saying, "Oh, wait a moment, the Messiah's here." So names have a power. Names have an indication sometimes of meaning as well as identity. And here we are at St. Peter's. So, although the gospel story today would not seem a high recommendation for Peter, Peter has clearly an important place among the disciples and the gospel story. And I don't think it was because Peter was especially wise or powerful or insightful. Actually, quite the contrary. Peter messes up again and again in the course of the gospel narrative. He sometimes gets things right and often gets things wrong. He proclaims his undying fidelity and love for Jesus, and at the crucial moment of his arrest, he denies him and flees from the scene. But I think Peter is significant not because he's some rock of faith, but because he stands for all of us in our faith. I'll speak for myself, but I'll say it's not always smooth sailing. It's not a seamless path of belief and action and faith. For every step forward, there are steps backward. And it's a process and a living thing, this faith that we have. And sometimes, like Peter, we get it right and we get it wrong. So Peter, as a name of this congregation, is a holding or a place card, I think, for all people, in all conditions and situations. All of us get things right and get things wrong from time to time. So what does Peter really signify to me in thinking about it, and what might it be as a calling for a community of faith, an identity of a community of faith? Well, you know, in seminary, believe it or not, we didn't always pay attention to what was being taught. There were some very long afternoons about systemic theology. And I frankly don't remember all of those lectures. But there were moments by our teachers in seminary when they spoke or taught us that not only got my attention, they got my heart as well. And I remember one teacher in seminary in England saying, let's look at Peter. And let's look at Peter's first meeting of Jesus after the resurrection. And in one of the gospel accounts, if you'll remember, Peter and the other disciples have gone back to their earlier work and job as fishermen. In the chaos and in the desolation after Jesus' death, they have returned back to their boats and nets and are fishing. And we're told that they're out in the boat and they see a figure on the shore. And John, who's always right, especially in his own gospel, someone says, "Who is that?" And John says, "It is the Lord." And my teacher said, watch carefully what Peter does. Remember that the last time Peter had seen Jesus, he had denied him and walked away from him. He had not fulfilled his promise of remaining steadfast and loyal in his love for Jesus. That was broken. But what does Peter do? Well, we know Peter is a little sketchy about water. But when John said, "It is the Lord," Peter can't wait to get to the shore in the boat. He dives into the water to make his way to the shore to be with Jesus. And my teacher said, think about that. if you had done what Peter had done, wouldn't you be heading in the opposite direction? Wouldn't you be trying to get as far away from Jesus as you could, unless you had experienced unconditional love? Unless you knew that Jesus loved you profoundly despite your brokenness, and that you could count on that love and forgiveness without question. No matter how badly we had messed up, how badly Peter had messed up, the idea is that unconditional love is the very foundation of our God. So for St. Peter's, it's not a bad name to have. If it's a reminder to a broken world hungering for a message of forgiveness and hope, what a great name to have. Because it speaks to the fact that no matter who we are, how broken we are, how we don't get it right, we don't have to worry about God loving us. It's unconditional. And knowing that, we can then live out our life of faith, knowing we'll mess up, knowing we'll misstep, and not get it right. But that's our nature. God's nature is to be unconditional in love. And that's a great message and a great name for a congregation. Amen.